A secret research endeavor under the direction of the British Admiralty produced a unique weapon that changed the course of maritime warfare during World War II. The result of trial and error. This anti-submarine projector turned the tide against Nazi U-boats and wreaked havoc in the Pacific. Instead of dropping depth charges and relying on hydrostatic shock waves, a different approach was conceived early in the war. Design a device that would fire spigot mortars ahead of a ship and detonate only on contact with a hard surface. Although the original Fairley mortar failed, the lessons learned gave rise to a new idea, the Hedgehog. Named for its rows of launcher spigots that resembled the creature's spines, the Hedgehog redeemed the Fairley and became one of the most feared weapons against German submarines. After the outbreak of World War II, German U-boats posed a grave threat to the Allied fleet in the Atlantic, and Britain urgently needed a weapon to even the odds. The top-secret project was carried out by the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development of the Admiralty, aiming to build a weapon more lethal than conventional depth charges. The first attempt, tested in 1941 and known as the Fairley mortar, failed, but it provided critical lessons that led to the Hedgehog, an innovative mortar capable of launching dozens of projectiles at once. The multiple spigot mortar concept was originally developed by Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker from early infantry trench mortars, a single device able to launch multiple warheads of various sizes, using a propelling charge that pushed against a rod seated in a base plate and fitted inside a tubular tail attached to the charge body. That principle was adapted for naval use in partnership with Major Millis Jeffries of Military Intelligence Research, who brought Blacker's design into the Army and helped adapt it for ships. The Hedgehog could fire a salvo of 24 small bombs directly ahead of a ship. Trajectories were calculated mathematically, so the projectiles landed within a circular or elliptical pattern roughly 100 feet across at about 250 yards. Early mountings were fixed, but they were later replaced by gyro-stabilized bases, allowing attacking ships to roll and pitch more freely. Each projectile carried a 35-pound Torpex charge, measured 7.1 inches in diameter, and weighed 65 pounds. The spigot angle produced a pattern about 130 feet in diameter, reaching roughly 590 feet ahead of the ship. Sinking at 33 feet per second, the bombs could reach a target separated by 200 feet in under 9 seconds. Crucially, the charges detonated only on contact with a hard surface, delivering far more immediate and lethal damage to a submarine than depth charges, which depended on shock waves. Fitted at the bow, the device increased the accuracy of anti-submarine attacks and forced the Germans to develop countermeasures. Each of the Hedgehog's 4 cradles fired 6 projectiles in sequence, staggered so they landed simultaneously. This reduced stress on the mounting, avoided the need for heavy deck reinforcement, and allowed relatively straightforward retrofitting. Reloading took no more than 3 minutes. The system also solved a serious sonar problem. When a submarine got closer than the minimum range of existing sonar, the echo returned too quickly, merging with the original pulse and producing an instantaneous echo that blinded operators to the target. This blind spot let submarines evade depth charges, so a forward-firing weapon that could discharge projectiles while the target was still detectable gave the Allies a real advantage in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. The mortar was less effective against very deep targets. Its use below about 400 feet was discouraged, but 1 or 2 direct hits were usually sufficient to sink a submarine. The Hedgehog entered service in 1942, and after installation on roughly 100 ships, submarine kills began to appear. Early on, its success rate was only marginally better than depth charges, at about 5%. Partly because heavy North Atlantic seas often covered launchers with spray and incomplete patterns were fired. Firing circuit problems also caused frustration among crews. In early 1943, the Royal Navy found Hedgehog use so intermittent that captains were ordered to report why they had not employed it after contact with a submarine. Lack of experience and familiarity with the new system contributed to inconsistent employment. But as crews learned and the weapon was refined, its effectiveness increased, and it became a respected component of Allied anti-submarine warfare. Confidence in the Hedgehog had initially been low, which contributed to disappointing results. Improved training and clear instruction on correct usage were implemented, and the weapon's effectiveness soon improved considerably. By the end of the war, it was estimated that 1 in 5 Hedgehog attacks produced a lethal hit, compared with fewer than 1 in 80 for depth charges. The new weapon's success prompted the Kriegsmarine to develop an acoustic torpedo program in 1943. These German homing torpedoes proved effective without requiring periscope sightings, allowing submarines to remain harder to detect and avoid counterattacks. Despite those countermeasures, the Hedgehog wrought relentless havoc in the Pacific in mid-1944, thanks to the skilled crew of USS England. USS England was a Buckley-class destroyer escort named for Pearl Harbor hero John C. England. Destroyer escorts were smaller and cheaper than fleet destroyers and were primarily tasked with escorting convoys rather than engaging in fleet actions. England displaced about 1,400 tons and carried a crew of roughly 186. She was less heavily armed than larger destroyers, 3 3-inch guns instead of 5-inch guns, fewer anti-aircraft pieces, and fewer torpedo tubes, but her anti-submarine armament, particularly the Hedgehog, set her apart. On May 18, 1944, England and 2 sister destroyer escorts were ordered to intercept a Japanese submarine bound for the Solomons. The next afternoon, sonar contacted I-16. According to Captain John Williamson, England's executive officer, the ship made 4 attack runs to deploy the Hedgehog, while I-16 maneuvered to evade by following England's course. On the 5th attempt, 4 to 6 projectiles detonated, and the stern of the submarine lifted and then fell heavily. Williamson later recalled that the crew with cataclysmic certainty heard the last of 1 Japanese submarine. Later that month, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched Operation Ago, a desperate plan to confront the Americans in a decisive battle. 7 submarines were to position themselves off the northeast side of New Guinea to give early warning and, more importantly, to sink enough Allied vessels to influence the coming engagement. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, American codebreakers had intercepted and deciphered the orders. England and her consorts were sent to the Japanese submarine line and systematically engaged them. On May 22, USS George detected RO-106 on the surface. After being illuminated by searchlights, the submarine dived but struggled to escape. England delivered a Hedgehog attack that registered at least 3 hits and brought an end to the contact as oil and debris bubbled to the surface. Over the next 2 days, England sank RO-104 and RO-116. A hunter-killer group then arrived to relieve the escorts, allowing them to resupply at Menace, though England intercepted and sank RO-108 on the way. After resupplying, England and her companions returned to the patrol line. On the morning of May 30th, the destroyer Hazelwood spotted RO-105 and several ships joined the hunt, including George and Raby. England was initially ordered to stand off. After a long day of tracking and unsuccessful attacks, England offered assistance but was told the other ships were handling a damaged sub and did not want help. Then RO-105 surfaced between the escorts, blocking mutual fire. Division Commander Haynes radioed, "Oh hell, go ahead." England then scored between 6 and 10 Hedgehog hits, triggering a massive explosion and an even larger slick of oil and debris. In 12 days, USS England sank 6 Japanese submarines, a record for the most submarines destroyed by a single ship, with Hedgehog attacks accounting for 5 of the 7 submarines originally positioned in the Japanese line. The episode foreshadowed the decline of Japan's undersea threat and helped hasten the end of the Pacific War.